Okay, welcome to MCRadio, the full length feature, because who doesn't want to talk to us for the entire length of an episode of This Is Us, right? So we are super excited for MCRadio to take a longer approach via podcast style, if you will, and dive into some super hot topics. So as a reminder, I'm Chloe Rice.
And I'm Marah Edlin.
And we are MCRadio, and we're officially on air. So today, what we're going to do is demystify one of my new favorite business terms. You know, it's not I'll circle back or let me piggyback on that, but it's actually around personal branding. So personal branding has become a business term for Marah and I because we've dove so much into it and have really taken kind of digital presence by storm in our own lives. But we realize that's not the case for everybody. So we want to break down personal branding and build it up so you feel comfortable understanding what yours is and how you can use it to power your life. So we're going to answer a few questions. Marah, in the simplest forms, what is personal branding?
Yeah, so for me, I honestly just think about like when you leave a room, what would everyone say about you? You know, what do they think of you and your style of work? How do you show up each day? What are those beautiful, amazing things that you do? And even the not so great things that you have to work on. But to me, it's really the essence of who you are. And again, what people would say about you behind closed doors.
I love it. So obviously, we've done a little bit of work on this, but have you figured out what your personal brand is?
I have. So it's actually interesting because I can remember going into like an initial interview for a manager role. And in preparing, one of my mentors, Mike Messier, was like, okay, so what's your style? What's your brand? And I was like, I have no clue. Like, I work hard. Like, I don't know. I was just thinking of characteristics that I thought were strong or that you would say in an interview. But as he spoke to me and really shared with me what he thought my brand was, it opened my eyes to something very different. It had nothing to do with like, I work hard and I'm going to outwork everyone. I mean, yeah, that's a part of it. But it's really about like who you are. Like, are you direct? Are you a go-getter? Are you that unique problem solver? You know, are you someone who simplifies the complex? Are you crazy competitive? It's definitely been a journey. I mean, even this year alone, even though I thought I knew my brand, I had to ask people. I would tell you early on, people would say high emotional intelligence. Didn't know what that was. I had to go Google that.
But you had a high one, so that's good.
High. Yeah, I was like, okay, I'll talk about that. And I also remember people saying you do a great job of leading from within. Also didn't know what they meant, but I would say that's one thing that I've carried through as a thread. It's really about how great is the team around me and like how do I lift them up to be awesome. I know I'm not the smartest one in the room, so that's definitely a piece of it. I also think I'm hyper focused. People use different terms for it. They're like, wow, she's observant. I would say if I'm new to a role or new to a meeting, I'm super quiet on the onset. I know a lot of leaders I work with are not like that. They'll
they
hop
lead
in
with
and
talking.
Yeah, exactly. Like 2 minutes in, they're like, interjecting, interrupting. But I like to absorb everything going on just to familiarize myself with things. So anyways, I would say hyper focus. And then I would also say just like a coach and encourager, like I do a great job of understanding like where someone's at and like how to make themselves a better version of themselves, not make them into, my style or, really great people like you, Chloe. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that you said something really interesting about how like it's kind of evolving and it's taken a while to figure out. And I think that's something that's important to note about branding because it's not stagnant, right? I'm a Gemini, so for any Geminis out there, you realize that like put me in a box or like make me pick a lane just will not work. So when everyone's like, oh, personal branding drills down to 3 words, stick with it so people know what to expect from you. I'm like, nah, that depends on the day. There are some fundamental things for me that will always be there, right? I'm incredibly loyal. And with that comes I will not let you down if you put me on a project, right? So there's some transferable things that will always be there, but just realize that like personal branding isn't 3 words you put on a LinkedIn headline and like that's all you are, right? I think that's too much pressure while people are trying to figure this out.
Yeah, it's funny because I've read certain articles when I've been like preparing for brand building sessions because I have my view, but I know the world's big and everyone has a different view. And one of the interesting things that came up that really resonated with me is, like what are your passions and triggers, right? And I was like, oh, interesting. Like what will boil your blood? So like for me, being a minority, being a female, being young, I tend to root for anything brown. Anything female, right? Like I want that underdog to really, really rise and do amazing things. And so, part of what I tend to be attracted to on LinkedIn or in articles are related to people having success or maybe even people struggling that are part of my demographic and me trying to think about, okay, how can I, really help that group? But the same thing with passions, like, one article I read was like, okay, what can you talk about endlessly? And like for me, it's like basketball, right? Like you get me in front of a basketball game on the screen or live for that matter. And like I'm all about it, right? So I can apply, what I love about basketball as an example to the workplace and to those things. And I tend to talk in that way, right? You'll notice I'll say, hey team. And people are like, oh, so is this your team? I'm like, well, of course it's my team, but it might just be my group of friends. It's just, that's just how I think and how I operate.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so you mentioned something about hiring, and I do want to drill down into the how, right? Because people want to know, if they're not familiar with this, how to actually start and where to apply it. But you mentioned something about gravitating towards someone who's brown and young and maybe someone who's into sports because they work with you. But like, how has you figuring out your personal brand changed maybe the way you interview? Or do you think, like now we're digital, do you think if someone has their personal brand figured out, that they have something heads and shoulders above a candidate?
Yeah, so both great questions and interesting because I remember taking an unconscious bias training, and I'm thinking because of where I come from, my environment, I'm the most open-minded person you could find, right? But as I went through the training, you're exactly right. And it's true. Like if I'm in an interview and someone was like a server at Olive Garden, which I did before, right? Or they're into cars or sports, I'm like, they're good. We should hire them. They're good.
Done. That's it.
I was very like that, right? Like almost a bias towards that. And so that training opened my eyes to fall back and understand what diversity means to me. And it is people that can like nerd out, as an example. Like I'm not the technical salesperson. I'm more of the relationship, how can I solve a problem? Let me make sure I'm communicating a lot. But like high technical salespeople are amazing at what they do. And so I've learned, as an example, right? Like I want someone that can nerd out with a customer because I think there's beauty that comes within those dialogues and also elevates the team. But what is interesting about this new digital reputation, I tend to do an okay job at like reading the tea leaves on what's coming. But I will tell you, in the past 2 years, 100% of the time when I'm in an interview, it could be like for a field rep and I'm just helping out, or maybe an intern, like it's all different things. But all the candidates will say to the panel, oh, I looked you guys up on LinkedIn. And that used to not really be, I mean, I'd be like, okay, like whatever, like cool.
Yeah, sweet. You saw my school I went to.
Yeah,
and that's
but
it.
now, yeah, exactly. But now that we've done like Let's Get Social, and I've learned so much over the past 6 months, that means a lot to people, right? They want to understand, who am I working with? What is their style? Are they only about the numbers and results? Are they about this? And then I find myself doing the reverse, right? When people reach out like, hey, is HP hiring? Like I get super nosy in their LinkedIn profile because I just want to know, like, not only their resume and how long did they keep a role, but, I'm curious, like, what are they into? What kind of posts do they like? Do they geek out, in that way? And so, I don't think yet it's like the primary thing people are doing, but I do think over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, it will be the primary thing that really stands out to people as, do I think they're capable above and beyond their resume?
Yeah. And that's something super important, because I think we like to believe that social media and business don't coexist. but the percentages of people who will look you up on LinkedIn or maybe even view your open profiles on other platforms, that builds your personal brand, right? So like you said, it's something that someone says about you when you're not there, right? So this isn't a presentation you give about yourself and you get to control all the narrative. This is something people are doing when you're not around. So when you like something controversial or you're posting negative things, whether it even be on your personal site, right, that builds your personal brand and people can see that, right? So we need to stop, kind of pretending that there's a separation of church and state here, because everything is for everyone to view now. And that builds part of your digital reputation. And then again, how people view your brand.
Yeah, you are so right. And whether we like it or not, all of us, me included, right, we pass judgment immediately on people. And, to your point, I don't see it often, but when someone's taken a super negative approach on a post, I think there's someone who like their happy meter's not high, or they don't find joy in what they do, or they see the world as half empty, right? And like right now in this world, I mean, COVID, social inequalities, racism, elections, and then like even if you boil it down to HP, right? Like we're going through a lot of transformation, our tools are changing. At the end of the day, like I want someone who thinks the glass is half full and that they can do it. So if I see you posting a lot like that, I kind of do get a sense that that's your vibe, or that's the feeling, or that's how you're accepting the world. And no, things aren't beautiful for all of us. I don't need rosy colored glasses. But in our world, your mentality has to be like, I got this, no problem. What's next? How do I help? So I think they're literally one and the same, and how you show up digitally totally matters when it comes to negative and positive, reputation.
Yeah. So go in and clean up all your social platforms and take down everything that could be a strike against you, because another thing about personal brand is that, we mentioned it's not static, but also you have the ability to change it, right? So a lot of people ask like, well, what if I'm not perceived well by a coworker who I've had issues with? Or what if my leadership, is more negative than I am, and so they represent me? So how do they change a negative brand that's been associated and put on them a little bit, maybe by their ecosystem?
Yeah,
but it can be changed.
No, it totally can be changed. In fact, I've seen people do it. There's a few examples of, people who were going for manager roles and they were perceived as like too edgy or too, straightforward and lacking empathy or what have you. And there's people who have worked really hard to reestablish that, to get involved in certain projects where, they could actually show their actual personality, not just that perception, that people were receiving. And it's super important. And I think the most coachable people are the best, right? I can remember this was just a couple years ago. I ended up hiring this guy, but everyone was telling me, well, he's good, but he's cocky, right? And I'm like, well, has anyone given him that feedback? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay. So in a conversation, I just told him, I'm like, I don't know you that well, but like, this is what people say. He's like, oh, really? And when he described to me what was happening in his interviews, he wasn't trying to be cocky at all. He was asserting that I got this, game on, I'm your go-to, but people were receiving it. And he immediately changed it around. And as he went through panel interviews, everyone gave the feedback, that cocky version of him, like, I don't see it anymore. So it's like, that person changed it within a matter of a couple of days just by recognizing how he was approaching it, came across a certain way, and asked me like, well, how would you tweak this comment? And I gave him a couple of tips, and he's rocking and rolling. So whether it takes a year, 2 years, like you said, whether you have to disassociate with people, I think that's the beauty of things like LinkedIn, right? I don't have a box, a ceiling, and that many associations. If I pop on video by myself, people will say, oh, that's Marah. They won't say, oh, that's that person that's on that team with that one guy or that one gal, who's really attitude, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, I totally agree. I think you can absolutely change it in any given moment.
But I think the key that you said there was they have to ask for feedback, or you have to ask through the process, how am I perceived?
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't want to know that, right? And if you don't want to know that, maybe that's just your first step to saying, okay, maybe I have some assessing to do. Because if you don't want to know how people view you, you may already know a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great point. And what's hard about that is, and I'm one of them, right? Like, it's like I want constructive criticism, but I'm like scared of it. I'm like,
You're
what
like,
are they going to say?
can you be nice, please?
And I'm the person who I feel like all of us are like this, right? Like my first 30 seconds, okay, maybe the first day, I'm like, they're wrong. I'm not like that. Like, absolutely not. But when I process it over time, I'm like, oh, I'm exactly like they are so right. But what I was gonna say is what's interesting is people struggle to ask. That's one. But people struggle to keep it honest about someone else, right? I'll give you a perfect example. Like when we're preparing for our end of year reviews, I do ask the managers, like, hey, give me a few people I can ask questions of, what did you do great? What do you need to work on? But I also step outside of that and I ask some of their biggest critics, like, hey, what does this person need to work on? Because I want to understand how everyone is receiving the managers, where their happy meter is at. And like 1 out of 5 will keep it very real. They'll be like, okay, look, this is what I think this individual needs to work on, and this is what would make me better. The others are very like, they're great. They're awesome. So I do think there's a way to critique and be honest. But unless you have that, you literally don't know. Me, like I can be direct. I used to not smile a lot, believe it or not, like in the office. But it took someone like keeping it really honest with me, where I was like, oh, okay, let me adjust, right? And those are actually the moments I've appreciated the most, because I grow and learn and I catch it, and I can tell I have a better reaction once I fixed it up.
Yeah. Well, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah. Totally.
So let's move into the how, right? Okay. Are there 5 fundamental steps to finding your personal brand? Is it that easy? Is it not that easy?
Yeah, so I think there are some low-hanging fruit. Some of them we've mentioned already that I would call out. And then I think others actually require some very deep soul searching, which it's hard for a lot of us to do or to pause and do. I definitely think go ask 20 people family, friends, coworkers, and even ask someone who challenges you. What are the 3 words you would use to describe me? I know we often talk about that, but it's actually interesting what people will come with, because what you think of yourself might be very different than what someone else thinks about you, right? I used the example earlier of like hyper focus. Well, that's actually a word that came out of just 6 months ago when I was asking people around me, right? My dad ended up talking about it, a couple of my coworkers, I had friends, right? And I used to call it either driven or observant. But hyper focus was like, first of all, a much cooler word. I was like, yeah, I'm taking that.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like when I'm honed in on something, I'm hyper focused and I'm going to get the job done, right? So I think that's important. It's a good moment to reflect, and you'll be very intrigued by what people say. There's even odd ones that you're like, really? You think of me like that? That hopefully, make you warm and fuzzy and happy about it. So I think that's one of them. I also think, really digging deep and evaluating like your values. I mean, there's plenty of quizzes out there and, things, but, really asking yourself, okay, what motivates me? Right. And how does that come through? I talked about it a moment ago, but what are my passions? Or what are your experiences? Right. Like if you grew up playing competitive sports, let's say with a single mom, with 6 brothers, right? That probably makes up a lot about how you move through the world. So all of that's a lot more digging deep. But I think the thing I would remember, it's not the task and skills. It's more about who you are and the characteristics of who you are that really make up your brand.
Yeah. I actually heard something from a woman named Jenny Heike. She does kind of business consulting and whatnot on these same topics, or female empowerment in general. But she drew the conclusion, or the picture of your brand is like a tree, right? There's things that you see, like the roots that are fundamental to your life, the things that you grew up in, the groups you were involved in, probably a lot of forces maybe you didn't have a lot of control over because you were young. And then there's the things you do see, right? Even your physical appearance drives a bit of your personal brand because, again, it is how you're perceived from other people. So it's kind of interesting when you think about it that way, and there is kind of that foundation of things that have already been set in your life. Well, you're going through the personal journey of personal branding. Was there something that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was a part of my personal brand from when you were young? And it absolutely is.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what I would lean into is, well, it's a couple of things, right? I think one of them is my hyper competitiveness. I know I'm competitive, I played sports and all of that. But when I take a look at my parents and how they raised me, it's actually even deeper than competitiveness. What it
Mm,
is this notion that I can do absolutely anything, and that 90% of your hurdle is getting over it up here in your mind, right? And so from like a young age, my dad talked about visualization. So like when I
mm,
would go through to the free throw line as an example, I imagined the ball going in and it would go in, right? And so it's the same with my career. Like I visualize how the interview is going to go and I see myself in the role, and so I'm already there. And I am one of those people because my parents taught me you can be president, you can be anything, right? Yes, you got to work hard. Yes, you got to understand and be the best at what you're doing, but you can do it. And so my mindset about everything is, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can
mm-hmm.
do that, right? And I don't think I didn't realize everyone wasn't raised that way. I thought every parent encouraged their kids to be awesome. But quite the contrary
Yeah.
actually happens, right? There's people, I've heard stories, some amazing leaders, in fact, where, nothing was ever good enough. And, you know, C's and B's were acceptable, right? And for me, not only did I think I could do whatever, I didn't know, I never got anything but straight A's. I didn't know college was an option,
Yeah.
right? So there's some core things that like I thought were normal that aren't, but they bleed through, and I think that's what drives that's where you see driven and competitive and
Mm-hmm.
hyper focused. It's because like I live by the notion that yeah, I can do absolutely anything I want to do.
Yeah. I would say that actually I came to a lot of the same conclusions based on the level of support that my parents had. I had this kind of elusive safety net where no matter what, my parents were going to support me. Eventually, they'll get me back on my feet. And where I've had to use that in a couple times in my life, right? It's just this unspoken thing that's really built me up. I think, I have a lot of confidence in things that I do that I I don't necessarily, I shouldn't, right? I don't actually know how to do everything. I can't walk into rooms
Yeah.
and like be an expert, right? But there's just this thing where it's like, okay, I'm gonna start with this high level of confidence, and then if the situation yields itself, I'll adjust. But a lot of times, like that confidence, that support, that driving nature, competitiveness, that gets you so far and through a lot of doors because it isn't as obvious or as ingrained as a lot of people think that it is.
Yeah, and what I like about what you're saying is, what I talked about has a two-edged sword in the sense that even at this age, I like do not want to disappoint my parents, right?
Mm,
And the level at which I strive to attain and succeed is can be unhealthy, right? It can be
yeah.
like I don't want to show them that I failed. And what I like about what you're talking about, and I'm totally taking note as a parent, no, it's true, is that there needs to be that plus what you're talking about,
Mm,
because I feel like what you're describing is um, I'm not afraid to fail, so I go,
yeah.
right? Where what I'm describing is
Ruled by fear.
you can, yeah, yeah, you can do it, be amazing, work hard, and that's it, right? And so there are times where, I will go, my parents do support me and I can go to them, but because I've built up my own necessity to be like awesome all the time, I get really intimidated to tell them when I failed, right? So
Mm,
I love what you're talking about because it's a different approach, But I think that's healthy for any of us who are parents, listening in to recognize that, your kids do have to know that no matter what, you have their back, because it allows them
Yeah.
to go be confident in whatever they're trying to do.
I'm also the last of four, though. So, there wasn't a lot of zeroed in focus on me.
Okay, so I'm an only child. So,
yeah, and we have only children, right? So,
Yeah.
So whatever, in your personal brand, you're probably a driver, but just try not to impose that so much on your kids, right? They're probably a little different too. And, I always hear you get one that you deserve, right? Not one that's almost exactly what you asked for. So you do actually, discovering your personal brand helps in all aspects of your life. It takes time for you to self-reflect. You're like, here's my strengths, here's my weaknesses. Yes, I can use this in professional, but a lot of times it's in your family, friend, and parental avenues of life too.
1,000%. In fact, that's where it helps me most. It's not on my LinkedIn post or, how I show up my team. It's exactly that. It's, really, because I think once you recognize yourself and then you start to become intuitive about other people and their style, then you know how to really navigate and influence and, simmer a conflict or, have a healthy conversation. But yeah, that's actually the place I would say it helps me even more is with my kiddo or with my parents or with my friends, for sure.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to pivot into a section that I like to call, what does LinkedIn say? What does LinkedIn say? Na, 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 na. Remember that song? What does the fox say? Marah's like, oh, you didn't run this segment by me.
What is this section? Yeah. I'm like, where are we going?
Yeah, there was a really annoying song. What does the fox say? And so I'm like, oh, what does LinkedIn say? Okay, we're gonna have to change the beat and add it as a track later. Okay, so I was interested. Obviously, we're super passionate about personal branding, and we understand the power of it. But I wanted to see, what does LinkedIn say about it? And when I just typed in personal brand, there's 770,000 people or roles that come up when you type in personal brand. So they're coaches, they're motivational speakers, they're directors of marketing, they're digital experts. So it's everywhere. And so I wanted to know, what is the first thing they're saying? So Marah, you're in the hot seat. The first person's post said that gurus have brainwashed us to believe that personal brand is how you will propel your business forward. We don't like this guy, just kidding. And how it has how companies want it to be intrinsically about you when it's truly about the company brand. He drew the parallel. When's the last time you bought a Steve Jobs phone? So what are your thoughts on company versus personal? Should we even bother? Are we going to end the podcast here?
Yeah, so I do disagree. I mean, I think that's the beauty of the world, right? We all have different opinions. For me and in our line of business, right, it's a little different. Like an iPhone, as an example, is a consumable, right? And there's probably only a few that like love Steve so much, they're like, I'm sticking with iPhone the rest of my life. But what I think is like when you have a long sales cycle, and where we work and where you are connecting with customers on a weekly basis, every other day, what have you, I actually think it matters a whole lot because in our business, it is crazy competitive. If you think about a PC, a lot of people will tell you, a lot of IT directors I've worked with are like, a PC is a PC is a PC. In fact, you get all your parts from other places, right? And it is true, right? While we engineer the baddest products on the planet and we're an engineering company at heart, what does start to separate yourself, especially if you have gnarly tools, crazy systems, hard to find the ETA, is do I like working with this person? I mean, we heard about it from a customer in our last session where, people buy from people. And so he pays a lot of attention to how long have you been in the role and are you going to have my back for a while? He thinks of it as an actual relationship, right? Not just a partnership. He's like, I don't want to just hop in and date and I don't know you. Like, I want to get to know what you're into. And I also think, all deals, I mean, even in our business with Sandy Waller, right, what we do with print, we did a session on like real reasons why we win. So we went back and evaluated every win notice, every little thing that happened over the past few years. And it was glaring that relationship is what won the deal, right? And
Yeah.
so to me, with relationship obviously comes with who you are, how are you handling your business. And I feel like things like LinkedIn as an example, yeah, it pushes the culture of HP forward to people know like, oh, people like Marah and Chloe work at HP. That's awesome, right? There's that piece of it. It's also, man, I would buy for them. They just seem like, lighthearted, amazing people just trying to better the world, right? There's that. But then there's the selfish aspect as well, right? If you are someone who's like, oh, it doesn't matter, the company just wants you to be out there, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine, but you still have you to worry about. And if you do
Yeah.
think of the world in the sense of I'm just a number at a company, okay, because of that, go establish your brand and separate yourself from that. So that way, when you go for your next role or you start poking at another company to see if there's a fit, you still have established your personal brand and who you are. I think no matter what, you have to get in the game and play it well.
Yeah, I agree. No matter what company you work for, whether they have a great brand or not, you still got to carry your own, right?
Literally,
So
yes.
love it. Love it. We don't like that guy's comment. We're going to move on. We're not going to name him. Okay, so a topic around video. We have somebody who posted about how there's a big push to be on video. And if that is not your natural gift, don't do it.
Well, I have seen videos where I cringed, so I actually understand exactly where that post is coming from. I think there'd be two things I would say, right? For a lot of us who do face-to-face sales, I think figuring out this muscle, or do sales in general, figuring out this muscle and practicing it actually is important. Even if you're introverted, you hate it, you don't like how you look, you don't want to get a green screen, I say out with the old, in with the new, and practice and work on it. Find a safe way to work on it. Only because if our world keeps transforming digitally this quick, I mean, I can totally see a day where everyone is just a digital seller and we're on video and that's all we do, right? So that's one piece of it. I think the other thing that was super enlightening that Kurt actually brought up in our last session is that there are ways to show up on video without necessarily doing what we're doing, right? Like we hop
Mm,
on and we just talk and we just go for it. But, he described moments where, you can just be the voice overlay on a presentation and slideshow. I'm like, oh, that's Moneyball. You don't even have to
mm-hmm.
show up, right? Or where you could just do an intro about yourself or about what you're about to show and then show, a completely separate video. So I think in the context of video, yes, it's what gets people's attention, right? When I want to YouTube a hair routine, like I'm looking for a video. I don't want to read the text of how to
You
do
can't
it. I
listen to a
want,
voice overlay of a perfect
yeah, like
curl.
no, I want to see a video.
Yeah.
So even if you're uncomfortable talking on video or, maybe you're not willing to practice, I still think there's ways you can show up on video and create some content that people really will gravitate to and super appreciate.
Love it. I agree. We are clearly pro video here. It's the only way people see us anymore. It's the only way we get ready anymore. So, it's multi-purpose, honestly. It's multi-purpose. Okay, so we have one last thing I wanted to bring up. You talked about Let's Get Social, which is the social selling readiness training that we've rolled out for the last 12 months. We're going to continue to keep going because it's obviously super powerful and HP is just clearly rocking it in that world. But one thing that we as a group have found is that we start with establishing and finding your brand before we get into posting, before we get into connecting, before we want anybody to really do anything. Stop and let's talk about brand. So can you talk about why, it's important to do that first? Or do you think that, you could be super successful with skipping that step?
Yeah. I actually more and more am convinced that that is the primary thing. I mean, even if you spent 2-3 months identifying your brand before you even post anything, I think it's important because, well, for one, I mean, we're posting in this digital world and whatever you do and say will never go away, right? And so being thoughtful about it is super important. I've seen people just hop in and not think about it. And they'll get feedback like, well, you seem all over the place, or what are
Mm-hmm.
you actually into? Or sometimes they don't get reactions at all. I've never done social media until LinkedIn until literally last year. And I used to be like, what's up with these likes and comments, like whatever, views, whatever. But what it shows you is that people are connecting with what you're talking about and who you are. And so I think it's important because, showing up in a positive way, imparting your gifts to the world, those are some of the things you probably want to ensure. One thing I thought about when I first started on LinkedIn, even though I didn't have it completely figured out, is I thought, if my kids, children, or my great, great, great grandkids ever see this, I want them to think, man, our great 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 grandma was a badass. Like, I want them to think, wow, she seemed like this and like that, right? Or whatever it is. And so, some of it is not only who you are, but it's what you're interested in being, right? And how
Mhm.
you want to be perceived. So I think it's the most critical part. I mean, honestly, if I didn't establish my brand, I would have no clue how to come on my videos. I would have no clue what topics I wanted to post about and what I want to be known for. I definitely would be all over the place because I'm like you, like everything's interesting and it's all
Yeah.
super cool. But yeah, I think it's the single easiest point to start at because then it helps you develop like how you're going to show up digitally.
Yeah, I agree. So personal brand, we disagree with the naysayers. It's vital to your success. It's vital to understanding where you're going to take yourself on this digital journey. And with 800,000 people nearly in that position already on LinkedIn, clearly it's not going away. So this was us for personal branding. We are super excited about what's to come for 2021. We're going to have super awesome guests. We're going to pop in with just the two of us to drop some knowledge like we just did. And Marah, any last comments before we go off air?
No, I just, for people who have been like dedicated and going on this journey with us, I just want to say thank you. There's so much gratitude. We have no clue what we're doing. But
Don't say that.
But we know we want to show up, right? And we know that we want to make sure we're staying front and center with really amazing, important topics. So if you've been tuning in and not liking and commenting, join the conversation, please. And then again, for those of you who have and the people we work with, we miss you guys so much and super appreciate the viewership and the support you guys have given us. So.
Yes. All right. MCRadio is officially off air for now.
Off air. Catch you guys later. Bye.